Yo, so with everything that's been going down with the U.S. and Iran lately, I had to bring you guys this clip of Piers Morgan sitting down with Professor Muhammad Marandi because Marandi does not hold back at all. We're going to watch the whole thing play out, and then I'm coming back at the end with my thoughts, my commentary, and my take on everything. Let's get it. So
the US could not be clearer. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of State for War, says Iran begged for a ceasefire under overwhelming pressure. My next guest may have a different interpretation. With a view from Tehran, I'm joined again by Professor Muhammad Marandi. Professor Marandi, welcome back to Uncensored.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So the United States claiming overwhelming victory, but with a slight caveat on the battlefield. My take on this is that I think the United States and Israel have had overwhelming military success on the battlefield, but there's been an asymmetric war going on, which has involved the Straits of Hormuz and also the neighbouring Gulf countries, Gulf states, where Iran could legitimately lay claim to have been very successful in responding to the military threat by effectively paralysing the globe economically in terms of the energy coming through that strait. What is your take on this?
My take is somewhat different. I don't think the United States won militarily, and of course the Israeli regime has a much smaller military. The United States focused mostly on civilian targets, and since it failed to destroy any of Iran's underground missile bases, and it failed to destroy its underground drone bases or the factories that produce them. And that's why for 40 days, Iran's missiles and drones were being fired 24 hours a day. Because of that, they were frustrated and they were constantly bombing civilian targets. In fact, yesterday, they bombed a synagogue. And I think that that has not been reported anywhere in the Western media, but they completely demolished a synagogue in Tehran. And that's just one of thousands of places that have been targeted. Very near my home, they destroyed a building with a bank, just apartment buildings above a branch of a bank. And they've been doing that across the city and across the country. So I think it's a military failure. I think it's a political failure. And of course, they forced Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz because those Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, they were complicit in this war. They provided the United States with bases. They allowed them to use their airspace. They allowed them to use areas outside the bases to attack Iran. So Iran obviously would not allow their ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And when Iranian oil and gas and critical infrastructure was struck, they'd be hit in response. And of course, Iran was striking the Israeli regime 24 hours a day, as we all know. So I think that the United States and the Israelis, the Israeli regime, failed catastrophically. It was they who changed their position. Trump said initially that he wanted unconditional surrender. Then, after evolving his position, he gave a 15-point plan. Iran rejected it. And then he ultimately, last night, accepted that framework, the 10-point plan that Iran gave as a framework for negotiations. That doesn't mean we'll have a deal. Iran is not naive. And Trump already attacked this twice as we were negotiating. So Iran is prepared for renewed war. But it is a major achievement.
I mean, the major achievement is that the regime that rules in Iran remains intact. And the issue I would certainly have with Pete Hegseth and the others, including President Trump, when they say that it's a different regime because it's different people at the top, I would imagine it's crystal clear that it's IRGC. They remain the regime. It is just a question of different people, but they're all part of the same regime. Would you agree with that?
No, I think the Islamic Republic of Iran is quite clearly it has a constitution. The leader is the person in charge. In fact, he was the person who made changes to Iran's proposal and ultimately turned out to be the 10-point plan. We have a president. We have a chair for the Supreme National Security Council. All of these institutions are very important. And I think the most important thing, though, Piers, which will ruffle your feathers, is that the Islamic Republic of Iran, whether you like it or not, has a high degree of popular legitimacy. And during the first week of the war, after Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred, it was basically the people who were on the streets who kept everything running. It took a week for us to elect a new leader. Of course, during that week, the Constitution provided us with a three-man leadership, but it was the people who were holding things together. There are no queues or lines at the gas station. No one went and rushed into, none of the people rushed into supermarkets. Everything was as normal. And every night we've seen millions of people on the streets throughout the country, on the streets, defending the armed forces, defending the leadership against this aggression.
Can you envisage a situation as part of a deal where Iran voluntarily gives up all its enriched uranium and where it cedes control of the Strait of Hormuz?
No, Iran will continue to enrich uranium within the framework of international law. It will be willing to have a deal. We already had a deal to have extra supervision if anyone is truly worried. But remember, Joe Kent, when he resigned, he wrote in his letter, and he was a Trump appointee, a senior intelligence official. He said that Iran was no threat to the United States. He said that Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon. And he said this war is about Zionist pressure in the United States and the Israeli regime putting pressure on the United States. This is was a completely unnecessary war where the Americans murdered many, many Iranians.
Donald Trump has said that these are red lines, particularly the enriched uranium. If what you say is true and the Iranian regime will not give up that enriched uranium, it sounds like there may not be a deal. So what happens then?
Well, the Trump regime has said many things in the past, and we have been a victim of two wars due to the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime. And we have come out on top on both occasions, and the world sees that. And we are prepared to defend ourselves in future again. And Trump, by carrying out this war at the behest of the Zionist and Israeli regime, they have badly damaged the global economy, it's going to get a lot worse. And as we speak, in fact, Piers, although Lebanon is a part of the agreement, and that is something that the Pakistani Prime Minister has said openly and in a tweet, the Israelis have been slaughtering the people of Lebanon all morning, carpet bombing cities just out of rage. And yet Trump then goes out and says Lebanon was not a part of the deal, where in fact it was, and the Pakistani Prime Minister said so. So we're dealing with ruthless people. We're dealing with people who are utterly immoral, who have constantly said they will destroy Iran, obliterate Iran, send Iran back to the Stone Ages, and of course, delete or erase an entire civilization. This is what we're up against. But ultimately, the Trump regime recognized that this war is going nowhere, and it is devastating the global economy, and it's going to devastate the U.S. economy if this continues.
Of course, all the things you've just said, many people would apply to your own regime, the Iranian regime. But Tehran has apparently said today, in the last few hours, it will withdraw from ceasefire if attacks on the Lebanon continue. That's from Iranian state media. Can you confirm that if these attacks in the Lebanon continue, then Iran will withdraw from this agreement on the ceasefire for 2 weeks?
Yes, Iran has already said that it is shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and it will also punish the Israeli regime if this continues. And the talks won't go anywhere if the terms of the ceasefire are not implemented. You know, I invited you a few times before to come to Iran, Piers, and you rejected to come for whatever reason.
Well, I've invited you to come to London, and you've rejected that as well.
I've lived in the UK. I've been there. Maybe I'll go one day. I'll come one day. But you should come for the first time. But my advice to you and to analysts in the UK and the United States is to read a book called Going to Tehran, written by two Americans who worked in the White House. One was the head of the Middle East under Condoleezza Rice, of all people, and the other was the head of the Persian Gulf at that time. Flint and Hillary Leverett, they wrote a book called Going to Tehran. if U.S. analysts had read books like this and dealt with Iran realistically, instead of listening to Zionists and Netanyahu, the world would be in a much better place, and probably Iran and the United States would have had normal ties, and there would be no war, obviously.
How are relations now, do you think, going forward between Iran and the neighbouring Gulf states, given that Iran has obviously been bombarding many of them with missile attacks, using the fact that they themselves have been attacked as the excuse to do this, and that's carried on post the ceasefire? What is going to happen between these relationships going forward?
Well, they should not have allowed their territory to be used to slaughter thousands of Iranians. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to be friends with the United States and allow their territory to be used to slaughter Iranians. And they probably thought that Iran would capitulate within a day or two, something that I told you would never happen. In fact, once upon a time, you told me that all the things that I was saying was bluster. But we saw during the past 40 days what happened. These family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf misread the situation, misinterpreted Iran's capabilities, and they made a major and catastrophic mistake. They will have to pay reparations for what happened to Iranians. And from now on, the Strait of Hormuz will be used to ensure that happens, and also to ensure that the Persian Gulf will never be again used as a platform for aggression, whether it's against Iraq or Iran or Yemen or Syria. These regimes have to behave like normal countries. Across Africa, we see countries that neighbor one another. They don't have foreign bases there to be used to bomb their neighbors. These regimes have made this mistake, and they have to pay for it. We want good relations with them, but they helped wage a war against us. Without their territory, this war could not have happened.
And when it comes to paying reparations, what about reparations then to countries like Israel, for example, who have been peppered with missile attacks from Hezbollah, from the Houthis, a barbaric terror attack from Hamas, all funded by Iran? Is there any accountability and responsibility at your end and your regime for the mayhem that's been wrought against Israel by those three terror proxies?
I think if we look historically, Piers, and I think you've had very good guests who can explain this better than I, but if we look historically, if there are going to be reparations, then it would have to be the UK, it would have to be other European countries, and the United States that helped with the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, with the colonization of Palestine, with the slaughter of the Palestinians, by pushing them into the slums of Gaza, the concentration camp of Gaza, by gradually taking more and more territory from the West Bank, where the refugees from Palestine have gone to, along with Gaza, and all those millions of Palestinians that are in refugee camps around the region. I think those countries are the ones who have to pay reparations to the Palestinian people. And as long as we have ethno-supremacism, Piers, and as long as people other than Zionists are considered to be Amalek and inferior, this problem is not going to be solved. The Israeli regime yesterday, as I said earlier, bombed a synagogue in Tehran. Why did they bomb these Jews? Because they're non-Zionist Jews.
Professor Marandi, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining me again on Uncensored.
Okay, so now you've watched it. Let's talk. Because what just happened in that clip is exactly what mainstream media doesn't want you to sit down and actually process. First thing, did you notice how Piers kept trying to frame this as an American victory? Overwhelming pressure, Iran begged. That's the headline they want you to walk away with. But Marandi didn't let him breathe for a second. And the reason Marandi was so composed, so confident, is because the facts were on his side. Now let me give you my take on what actually went down here. Number one, a synagogue got bombed in Tehran by Israel, and it was mentioned once casually in this interview and then disappeared. No breaking news, no outrage cycle, nothing, just silence. And that silence tells you everything about how selective the Western media is when it comes to this conflict. If that same synagogue was anywhere else, it would have been wall-to-wall coverage for a week. Number two, Iran never surrendered its nuclear position, not even close. Marandi made it crystal clear, enrichment continues. It stays within international law, and Iran is not giving that up. So if that was the whole point of this war, what exactly was achieved? You went in with a list of demands and came out with none of them met. That's not a win. That's just damage. Number three, the Strait of Hormuz situation is the one that people are sleeping on the most. Before any of this started, ships were passing through freely, no questions asked. Now, Iran has effectively turned that strait into leverage. That doesn't go away after a ceasefire. That's a permanent shift in power dynamics in that region, and the Gulf states who allowed their territory to be used are now in a very uncomfortable position because of it. So, number four, Trump moved the goalpost 3 times. Unconditional surrender, then a 15-point plan, then he accepted Iran's 10-point framework. That's not negotiating from strength. That's a man who overplayed his hand and had to quietly walk it back before the clock ran out, 2 hours before his own deadline. Think about that. And the last thing I'll say, and this is the part that nobody wants to admit, is that Iran came out of 40 days of war with its government intact, its military infrastructure intact, its nuclear stockpile intact, and now more control over one of the most critical waterways on the planet than it had before the first bomb dropped. You can spin that however you want. But those are the facts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe because we're not done talking about this.